At 72 years old, I thought I'd earned the right to enjoy Thanksgiving dinner without being humiliated at my own daughter's table. I was wrong. I'm grateful to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The morning of Thanksgiving started like any other holiday for the past 5 years. I woke up at 5:30, not because I had to anymore, but because old habits die hard. After 40 years of getting up before dawn to prep holiday meals for my family, my body still thinks November means early mornings and flour-dusted aprons. I'd been living with my daughter Sarah and her husband Mark for 18 months now. Not by choice, mind you. When my husband Frank passed away 3 years ago, I thought I'd stay in our little house on Maple Street forever. That house held 51 years of memories. Frank's coffee ring stains on the kitchen table. The growth marks we'd penciled on the doorframe tracking Sarah and her brother Tommy through childhood. The garden where I'd grown tomatoes that won the county fair ribbons 7 years running. But life has a way of making decisions for you when you're not paying attention. First came the hip surgery that laid me up for 3 months. Then the property taxes that seemed to double overnight. Then the furnace that decided to quit working right before the worst winter we'd seen in decades. Sarah kept saying it made more sense for me to move in with them. Save money, she said. Have help when I needed it. Be closer to my granddaughter Emma. What she didn't say was that I'd become the live-in babysitter, housekeeper and cook. Not that I minded helping out, you understand. Emma was 16 and barely needed watching, but she worked long hours at that law firm, and Mark's construction business kept him out until dark most days. I was happy to contribute. Felt good to be useful again after feeling so lost those first months without Frank. I'd get Emma off to school every morning, tidy up the house, start dinner preparations. When Sarah got home around 6:30, there'd be a hot meal waiting. I'd help Emma with her homework while Sarah and Mark relaxed in the living room. Weekends, I'd do the grocery shopping, meal planning, laundry. Sarah always said she appreciated it, but lately there'd been this edge to her voice when she talked to me, like I was in the way somehow. This particular Thanksgiving morning, I was up early as usual, prepping the turkey I'd bought with my own Social Security money. £22 bird because Sarah's brother Tommy was coming with his wife Jennifer and their 2 little ones. Sarah's sister Lisa would be there with her family too. 12 people total, and I was handling the entire meal myself while Sarah slept in until 9. I'd made the stuffing from scratch using my mother's recipe, the same recipe I'd used every Thanksgiving for the past 51 years. Cranberry sauce from real cranberries, not that canned stuff. Sweet potato casserole with the little marshmallows on top that Emma loved. Green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, gravy, dinner rolls that I'd started rising at 6 in the morning. By the time Sarah wandered into the kitchen in her bathrobe, I was basting the turkey for the 3rd time and checking on the pies I'd baked the day before. Pumpkin, apple and pecan, because everyone had different favourites. "Morning, Mum," she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd made hours earlier. "Smells good in here. Thanks for handling everything." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. "I love doing it. Keeps me busy." She nodded absently, scrolling through her phone. Mark appeared a few minutes later, also in his robe, also reaching for the coffee I'd prepared. "What time is everyone coming?" he asked. 2 o'clock, I answered, sliding the turkey back into the oven. "Everything should be ready by then." "Great," Sarah said without looking up from her phone. "I'm going to shower and get ready." They both disappeared upstairs, leaving me to finish the preparations alone. Which was fine. I'd been cooking Thanksgiving dinner by myself for decades. But something about their casual assumption that I'd handle everything, combined with the fact that they'd barely acknowledged the work I was putting in, left me feeling oddly hollow. The family started arriving right on time. Tommy and Jennifer came first with little Jake and Sophie, ages 4 and 6. Lisa showed up with her husband David and their 3 kids. The house filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of children running around. Everyone complimented the food as we gathered around the dining room table. The turkey was perfect, golden brown and juicy. The sides were all crowd pleasers. Even my pickiest great-nephew asked for seconds of the green bean casserole. We were halfway through the meal when Sarah decided to make her announcement. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she said, raising her wine glass, "and especially thank Mum for all her help lately. She's been such a blessing living here with us." There was a murmur of agreement around the table. I smiled, feeling warm at the acknowledgement. But Sarah wasn't finished. "I mean, where else can you get a live-in cook, housekeeper and babysitter all in one?" She continued with a laugh. "It's like having our own personal staff, except we don't have to pay wages." The laughter around the table felt different now. Uncomfortable. I felt my cheeks burning. Plus, she gets all the benefits of living in our house rent-free, eating our food, using our electricity and water, Sarah added, taking another sip of wine. "Really, it works out perfectly for everyone. We get the help, and she gets taken care of. Like having a freeloading grandma who actually earns her keep." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, some sympathetic, others carefully avoiding my gaze. Emma looked mortified. Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sarah," Jennifer said quietly. "Maybe that's not the best way to put it." "Oh, come on," Sarah laughed, but there was a sharp edge to it now. "I'm just being honest. We're all family here. Mum knows I appreciate her." I set down my fork carefully, my hands trembling slightly. The turkey I'd spent hours preparing suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. "Of course, dear," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Just being honest. But inside, something was cracking. Not breaking, not yet. Just developing hairline fractures like ice on a pond when the temperature starts to drop. I'd raised this woman, changed her diapers, stayed up all night when she had the flu, worked 2 jobs to pay for her college education after her father walked out on us when she was 12. I'd been there for every milestone, every heartbreak, every triumph. When she got divorced from her first husband, I'd taken her and baby Emma into my home for 8 months while she got back on her feet. And now I was a freeloader who earned her keep. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I barely heard any of it. I mechanically served dessert, accepted compliments on the pies, helped clean up afterward. When everyone finally left and the house grew quiet, I excused myself early and went upstairs to my room. Sitting on the edge of the bed Frank and I had shared for so many years before I'd moved it here, I stared at the family photo on my nightstand. It was taken last Christmas, all of us gathered around Sarah's tree. I looked happy in that picture, content, like I belonged. Tonight, for the first time since moving in with Sarah, I felt like an outsider in what was supposed to be my home too. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, replaying Sarah's words over and over in my mind. Freeloading grandma who earns her keep. The phrase echoed in the darkness like a slap that kept stinging long after the initial blow. I thought about Frank and what he would have said if he'd heard his daughter talk to me that way. He'd always been protective of me, even when we disagreed about things. Frank would have stood up from that table and given Sarah a piece of his mind that she wouldn't soon forget. But Frank wasn't here, and I was on my own. The next morning I woke up before dawn again, but this time I didn't get up to start breakfast. I lay in bed listening to the house wake up around me, Sarah's alarm going off, the shower running, Mark's heavy footsteps in the hallway, the coffee maker beeping downstairs, the one I'd programmed the night before out of habit. When I finally made it to the kitchen at 8:30, Sarah was rushing around looking for her car keys. "Mum, have you seen my keys?" she asked without looking at me. "On the counter by the microwave," I said quietly. "Thanks." "Oh, and Emma has a half day today, so she'll be home by noon. Can you make sure she does her homework before she goes anywhere?" "Of course." Sarah grabbed her keys and headed for the door, then paused. "And maybe we could have leftovers for dinner tonight. I'm beat from yesterday." She was gone before I could answer, leaving me standing in the kitchen that smelled like the turkey I'd cooked for people who saw me as hired help. That afternoon, while Emma was at school and Mark was at work, I found myself in the spare bedroom that had become my office. It was really just a corner with Frank's old desk and the computer Sarah's brother had given me last Christmas. I'd been meaning to get more familiar with it, but technology had always intimidated me. Today, though, I had a purpose. I pulled up the internet browser and typed in the name of the law firm where I'd had my will drafted 5 years ago. Morrison, Hayes and Associates. They'd handled Frank's estate, and they'd helped me organise my own affairs after he passed. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Morrison, Hayes and Associates. This is Patricia. Patricia, this is Helen Morrison. I worked with your firm a few years ago on my estate planning. Of course, Mrs. Morrison. How can I help you today? I'd like to schedule an appointment to make some changes to my will. There was a brief pause. Certainly. Let me check Mr. Hayes's calendar. Would next Tuesday at 10 work for you? That would be perfect. After I hung up, I sat back in Frank's old chair and looked around the room. Sarah had suggested I donate most of his things to charity when I moved in. Said there wasn't room for everything, but I'd kept his desk, his favourite reading chair, and the bookshelf filled with his mystery novels. This room was the only space in the house that felt truly mine. I spent the weekend observing my family with new eyes. Saturday morning, I made pancakes from scratch while Sarah and Mark slept until 10. When Emma came downstairs, she thanked me and asked if I needed help cleaning up. You don't have to, sweetheart, I told her. I know, Grandma, but I want to. She was a good kid. Always had been. It wasn't her fault her mother had forgotten how to show basic respect. Sunday evening, I overheard Sarah on the phone with her friend Melissa. I know it sounds harsh, Sarah was saying, pacing in the living room while I washed dishes in the kitchen. But honestly, it's working out so well. She does everything around here and we don't have to worry about daycare costs or housekeeping. Mum gets free room and board, so really, everyone wins. I set down the dish I was washing and listened closer. The only downside is that she's always here, you know? Melissa must have said something because Sarah laughed. Exactly. It's like having a live-in mother-in-law, except worse because it's my actual mother and I can't ask her to leave. My hands gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles went white. Mark thinks we should start charging her rent, Sarah continued. I mean, she's got that social security money just sitting around and she's using our utilities and eating our food. Our food. The food I bought with my own money and prepared with my own hands. I don't know, though, Sarah went on. It might cause drama, and honestly, what she contributes in labour is probably worth more than rent anyway. Labour. That's what 51 years of making Thanksgiving dinner had become. Labour that was worth more than rent. Tuesday morning, I told Sarah I had a doctor's appointment and would be gone for a few hours. She barely looked up from her phone when she said okay. The law office was in a tall building downtown that I remembered from Frank's funeral arrangements. Mr. Hayes was a kind man in his 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Morrison, he said, shaking my hand warmly. It's good to see you again. Patricia mentioned you wanted to make some changes to your will. Yes, I do. Some significant changes. He pulled out my file and reviewed it briefly. I see here that your primary beneficiaries are your children, Sarah and Thomas, with your granddaughter Emma receiving a smaller portion. That's correct. But I'd like to change that. I explained what had been happening at Sarah's house. The expectations that I contribute without acknowledgement, the comments about freeloading, the conversation I'd overheard about charging me rent. Mr. Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, are you making these changes because you're angry, or because this truly reflects how you want your assets distributed? I thought about that for a long moment. Both, I suppose. But mostly because I want my legacy to go to people who value what I've given them, not people who see me as a burden to be managed. He nodded slowly. I understand. Let's discuss your options. We spent the next hour going through my assets. I'd never really paid close attention to the numbers before, but seeing it all laid out on paper was eye-opening. The house on Maple Street that I'd sold to pay for Frank's medical bills and my own living expenses had brought in more than I'd expected. Combined with Frank's life insurance, our retirement savings, and the investments he'd made over the years, I was sitting on nearly $400,000, more than enough to live independently if I chose to. Mr. Hayes explained my options carefully. I could revoke Sarah's inheritance entirely. I could reduce it significantly. I could add conditions that had to be met before she received anything. Or I could leave everything as it was and hope things improved. I want to remove Sarah as my primary beneficiary, I said finally. Tommy can keep his portion. He's never treated me like a burden. And I want to increase Emma's inheritance significantly. What about the remainder? Mr. Hayes asked. I'd been thinking about that since Thanksgiving night. There was a women's shelter downtown where I'd volunteered before Frank got sick. They were always struggling for funding. And the animal rescue where we'd gotten our old dog Charlie. They could use the money. I'd like to split the remainder between the Haven House Women's Shelter and the Second Chance Animal Rescue, I said. Mr. Hayes made notes. What would you like to leave for Sarah? I thought about this for a long time. Nothing felt too harsh, but she was still my daughter. Despite everything, I couldn't completely cut her off. $1, I said, just so it's clear the omission was intentional. He looked up from his notes. Mrs. Morrison, I have to advise you that this kind of change might create family conflict. Mr. Hayes, I said, family conflict already exists. I'm just acknowledging it. By the time I left his office, the new will was drafted and signed. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a heavy suitcase for months and had finally set it down. The drive home gave me time to think about what came next. I could stay at Sarah's and continue being the unpaid help, knowing that my will now reflected my true feelings. Or I could make a bigger change. When I pulled into the driveway, Sarah's car was already there. She usually didn't get home until after 6, so I was surprised to see her in the kitchen when I walked in. "Mom, where have you been?" she asked, her voice sharp with irritation. "I told you I had a doctor's appointment. That was 3 hours ago. Emma got home from school and nobody was here. She had to walk to Mrs. Peterson's house to call me at work." I felt a pang of guilt about Emma, but irritation flared up alongside it. "I'm sorry Emma was inconvenienced, but I'm allowed to leave the house, Sarah. I don't need permission to run errands." Sarah's face flushed red. "Don't take that tone with me. You know we depend on you to be here when Emma gets home. Depend on me." There was that word again. "Maybe you should make other arrangements," I said quietly. "I won't always be available." What's that supposed to mean? Before I could answer, Emma burst through the back door, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Grandma?" "There you are. I was worried when you weren't here." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I had some business to take care of in town." Emma hugged me tight, and I felt that familiar surge of love for this girl, who never made me feel like a burden. She was the bright spot in this increasingly uncomfortable living situation. Over dinner that night, the tension between Sarah and me was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark seemed to sense it, making awkward attempts at conversation that fell flat. Emma kept glancing between us, clearly picking up on the strange atmosphere. After Emma went upstairs to do homework, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen while I was loading the dishwasher. "Mom, we need to talk about boundaries," she said. I straightened up, dish rag in hand. "I agree. We do. You can't just disappear for half the day without letting us know where you are. We have schedules to maintain, responsibilities." "So do I, Sarah." "Like what?" Her voice was getting louder now. "What responsibilities do you have that are more important than helping your own family?" The question hung in the air between us. What responsibilities did I have? In her mind, apparently none that mattered. "I'm 72 years old," I said slowly. "Not dead. I'm allowed to have my own life, my own schedule, my own priorities. Of course you are, but you're living in our house, using our resources. There has to be some consideration for how your actions affect us. Our house, our resources. Even though I contributed to the grocery budget, helped with utilities, and provided hundreds of hours of unpaid labour every month." "I see," I said. "So I'm a tenant who pays rent in the form of housekeeping and childcare." Sarah's face went white. "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Because that's exactly what you said at Thanksgiving dinner. Freeloading grandma who earns her keep. I was just joking, Mum. You know I didn't mean it like that. But she had meant it like that. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in the way she talked to her friends about me, feel it in every expectation that I'd drop everything to make her life easier. Maybe it's time I found my own place, I said. Sarah's expression shifted from defensive to panicked. What? Mum, you can't be serious. Where would you go? You can't afford rent on Social Security. Actually, I probably could. Mr. Hayes had mentioned several senior living communities during our conversation. Nice places with activities and meal plans and people my own age to talk to. People who wouldn't see me as free labour. I've been thinking about it for a while, I continued. Maybe it would be better for everyone if I had my own space again. Mum, you're being ridiculous. You belong here with family. Do I? Because lately I feel more like an employee than a family member. Sarah's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. She clearly hadn't expected me to push back this hard. Mark chose that moment to walk into the kitchen, probably drawn by our raised voices. Everything okay in here? He asked, looking between us nervously. Mum's talking about moving out, Sarah said, her voice tight. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Really? Why? I looked at both of them standing there, these two adults who had built their comfortable lifestyle partially on my unpaid labour, and felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Because I think it's time I started living for myself again, I said simply. That night, I lay in bed thinking about Frank and what he'd want for me. He'd always said that respect had to be earned, but once earned, it should never be taken for granted. He'd taught Sarah that lesson when she was growing up, or at least he'd tried to. Somewhere along the way she'd forgotten. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before Frank died. I made breakfast for Emma and saw her off to school as usual, but instead of starting my normal routine of housework, I sat down at Frank's old desk and started researching senior living options. By noon I had a list of 5 places within 20 miles of town. 3 were traditional apartment-style communities, 1 was a more upscale retirement village with golf and dining facilities, and 1 was a smaller, homier place that reminded me of a bed and breakfast. I spent the afternoon making phone calls and scheduling tours for the following week. Each conversation filled me with more excitement about the possibilities ahead. When Sarah got home that evening, she found me in the kitchen as usual, but instead of dinner preparations, I was reading brochures spread across the table. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Information about senior living communities," I replied, not looking up from the glossy photos of smiling elderly people playing cards and tending gardens. "Mom, about last night. I think we both said things we didn't mean." I looked up at her then. Did I? Because I've been thinking about our conversation all day, and I meant every word. Sarah sank into the chair across from me, her face pale. "You're really serious about this?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," I said, setting down the brochure I'd been reading. "Look at this place, Sarah. Sunrise Manor. They have book clubs, art classes, a community garden. When's the last time I did something just for me?" "But Mum, you have everything you need here. Family, a roof over your head, people who care about you. Do I? Because caring about someone means more than making sure they have shelter. It means respecting them, valuing them, treating them like they matter." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Of course you matter. You're my mother. Then why do I feel like your unpaid employee?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the table. Finally, she looked up at me. "I know I haven't been perfect, Mom. But moving out seems so drastic. Can't we just work on things here?" I'd been asking myself the same question for days. Could we work on things? Was it possible to rebuild the respect that had eroded so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was almost gone? Sarah, do you remember when you were going through your divorce from Emma's father? I asked. Of course. You and Emma lived with your father and me for 8 months. Do you remember how we treated you during that time? She nodded slowly. You were wonderful. You never made me feel like a burden, even though I know having a toddler in the house was hard on you and Dad. Did we ever call you a freeloader? Did we ever joke about getting free babysitting and housework out of the deal? Her face crumpled. No. You made me feel loved and supported. That's the difference, sweetheart. When you needed help, we gave it with love and respect. When I need help, I get treated like the hired help who should be grateful for the privilege. The tears were flowing freely now. I'm sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how I was making you feel. I reached across the table and took her hand. I know you didn't do it on purpose, but intent doesn't erase impact. The damage is done and I need to figure out how to heal from it. Please don't leave. We can fix this. I'll do better, I promise. I squeezed her hand gently. Maybe we can fix it. But I think I need my own space to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly trying to earn my place in someone else's home. Over the next week, I toured 4 of the 5 senior communities on my list. The 5th one, Sunset Gardens, had a 6-month waiting list. Each place had its merits, but when I walked into Sunrise Manor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I felt like I could belong there. The community was built around a central courtyard with walking paths and garden beds that residents could tend if they wanted to. The apartments were small, but well designed, with full kitchens and private balconies. There was a library, a fitness centre, and a dining room where meals were optional but available. Most importantly, the residents I met seemed genuinely happy. During my tour, I chatted with a woman named Dorothy who was planting bulbs for spring flowers. I moved here 2 years ago after my son kept insisting I needed more help, she told me, brushing dirt from her hands. Best decision I ever made. I see him twice a week now instead of feeling like I was underfoot every day. Our relationship is so much better. That evening I called Tommy to tell him about my plans. Unlike Sarah, he listened without interrupting. Mum, I think that sounds great, he said when I finished. You deserve to be somewhere you feel valued and independent. You don't think I'm being too harsh on your sister? He was quiet for a moment. Honestly, Mum, Jennifer and I have talked about how Sarah's been treating you. We've both noticed it at family gatherings. You're not being too harsh. You're being smart. His support meant everything to me. Tommy had always been the more sensitive of my 2 children, the one who noticed when people were hurting. The hardest part was telling Emma. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen one evening, making cookies together like we used to when she was smaller. Grandma, she said as we rolled out sugar cookie dough, are you really moving out? I am, sweetheart, but not because of you. You've been nothing but wonderful to me. Is it because of what Mum said at Thanksgiving? About the freeloading thing? You heard that? Everyone heard it, Grandma. It was awful. I was so embarrassed for you. I stopped rolling and looked at this beautiful young woman who had always seen me clearly, even when her mother didn't. Emma, I need you to understand something. Moving out doesn't mean I love you any less or that I won't be part of your life. It just means I need to take care of myself right now. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I get it, and maybe it'll be good for Mum too. Maybe she'll realise what she's been taking for granted. 2 weeks later, I signed the lease for a 1-bedroom apartment at Sunrise Manor. The move-in date was set for January 1st. A new year, a new beginning. Sarah alternated between trying to talk me out of it and helping me pack, as if she couldn't decide whether to fight my decision or accept it. Mark stayed mostly out of the discussions, but I caught him looking at me with what might have been newfound respect. On my last night in their house, Sarah knocked on my bedroom door. "Can I come in?" she asked. I was sitting on Frank's old chair reading one of his mystery novels. Of course. She sat on the edge of the bed we'd moved from my old house. "Mum, I know I can't undo the things I said or the way I made you feel, But I want you to know that losing you has made me realize how much I depended on you. Not just for the housework and cooking, but for everything. You were my security blanket, and I took that for granted. I closed the book and looked at my daughter, the same little girl I'd rocked to sleep, helped with homework, cheered for at high school graduation. Somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that parents deserve the same respect they give. I appreciate you saying that, Sarah. I really do. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own living room at Sunrise Manor, watching the sunset through my balcony doors. Dorothy and I tend the community garden together twice a week. I've joined the book club and started taking watercolour classes. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. Sarah visits every Sunday now, and our conversations are different. Better. She asks about my life, instead of assuming I exist solely for hers. Emma comes by after school sometimes, doing homework at my little kitchen table while I make us tea. The will remains unchanged. Mr. Hayes calls it my insurance policy against ever being taken for granted again. Sarah doesn't know about it, and maybe she never will. But I sleep better knowing my legacy will go to people who truly value what I've given. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is teaching them to appreciate you while they still can. And sometimes that means being brave enough to walk away until they learn to see you clearly again.